Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail. Today, we are going to share Wendigo encounter horror stories. First story. What does it mean when a Wendigo doesn't attack me? I stared a Wendigo in the eyes, and it nodded at me before vanishing. Many years ago, I had an encounter with a Wendigo. I'm part Cherokee and had heard about these monsters before. It was late at night. I was a teenager. I live with my family. We had a few dogs, and they needed to go outside before bed. One of the dogs would only go in our backyard. One of my family members opened the back door, and immediately the dog became aggressive, a dog that had never shown aggression before or after this night. Just as fast as she became aggressive, she became scared and ran back inside. I had just kicked my boots off after wearing them all day and was about to change out of my jeans when this happened. I quickly put my boots back on, grab a flashlight and a large club I had recently made. I book it out to the back of our house and just stop dead in my tracks. I don't see anything, I don't hear anything, but something was there. I could feel the presence of pure evil. Then I see a shadow moving, and it's huge. This shadow was easily 8 feet tall, vaguely humanoid, but had these massive antlers. Normally, my flashlight is able to illuminate everything pretty well. Tonight, I couldn't even see my hand in front of my face. It was like the light was going into a void. My eyes adjusted to the low light, only starlight letting me see it all. I stand there for what seemed like an eternity as I watch the figure search a workbench before it stops. The figure looks straight forward before turning around to face me, turning to reveal glowing red eyes. The figure and I stare at each other for what must have been only a moment, but felt like lifetimes. I know that showing fear in this situation is only going to kill me, and fighting is a death sentence. But for some reason, I lifted the club and pointed it at the figure. The figure looks at the club and looks back into my eyes before slowly nodding its head up and down a few times. I see my flashlight turn off in my peripheral vision. I look at it, and it turns back on, this time illuminating the entirety of the property. I quickly turn my focus back to the figure, only for the figure to be gone. What was lifetimes to me was no more than a minute in reality. Second story. What was this creature? I was catching up with a childhood friend the other day, and he brought up an encounter we had years ago that I haven't thought about in a while. We were 12 and playing manhunt with our friends late at night. We lived in a heavily wooded area in New England and had created a fairly extensive network of trails that went pretty deep into the woods over the years. Since it was pitch black in those woods, we would run around with flashlights, only turning them off to hide from the hunters. One night, my friend was chasing me down one of the trails with his flashlight on and mine's off in hopes I could slip behind a tree to evade him. At an intersection of 2 trails, I made a sharp left down a trail we had just recently added to our network and was almost immediately met by what I initially thought to be another hunter. I tried to make a sharp cut off the trail to evade the second hunter, but slipped and got tagged out by the initial hunter. As I was getting up, I looked to see who the other hunter was who cut off my escape, and quickly realized that it was none of my friends. The creature looking back at us stood on 4 legs, towering over us at about 7 feet tall, with its front legs longer than its hind legs, which also seemed to be bent backwards. It was completely devoid of hair of any kind, and its skin was a pale green hue, almost like it was decaying off. Its eyes glowed yellow in the light of the flashlight with a face that seemed almost human in an uncanny way. Both my friend and I stood frozen for what felt like an hour before sprinting out of the woods as fast as possible, not looking back even once to see if we were being pursued. After that encounter, neither of us dared enter those woods for a solid month. Now, my initial thoughts is that we saw a deer with some sort of horrible disease, although what we saw did not resemble any of the thousands of deer I'd ever countered prior to that experience, nor in the decades since. I have since dug deep into cryptid sightings in that area and again was unable to find anything that resembled the description of the creature we encountered. Does anyone have any suggestions, both natural or paranormal in nature, that could perhaps help describe what we both saw that night? Third story. Witness to witch near my house with multiple people. I grew up in a rural part of Maryland, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone within 10 square miles, and it took 30 minutes to get to the nearest department store. Our house was positioned between a cornfield and a forest. The road leading to my house was about 6 miles long, and the only people who ever drove down it were the handful of people that lived back there and the occasional archaeological van that would do digs in the plot next to our house when the farmers would turn the fields over. We had a few paranormal experiences in that house. I'll briefly mention a few of those before telling you the story behind the title of this post. One day, I was in my room upstairs playing piano, and I heard a loud bang on the wall outside my room. My parents said something like, "What the hell was that?" And when I walked out of the room to ask them the same thing, my piano started playing the pre-installed demo songs completely unprompted. It freaked all of us out enough that we called my brother, who was in college at the time, to tell him about it. And years later, he let us know that when we called him that night, he heard a deep laugh in the background of the phone call and was too afraid to tell us about it at the time. Another odd occurrence was when I was sitting in the sunroom and watched my brother walking through the front yard toward the door. I turned and looked into the living room only to see my actual brother sitting on the couch wearing a different shirt than the doppelganger that walked by the window. My parents would also hear me talking in the house pretty frequently when they knew I wasn't home. Anyways, in 8th grade, I had this witch experience that I haven't been able to shake, and I had other people with me. My friend's dad was driving me home in his 3-seater truck with my friend sitting between us. We got to the stretch of road where we could see my house across the field. They planted soybeans that year so the corn wasn't blocking our view. And in the ditch right by the road was a figure I can only describe as a witch. We all saw her. We drove right past her. The ditch lining the road was about 2 feet deep and somewhat overgrown, and we could only see the upper half of her body, as if she were sitting cross-legged in the ditch. She was wearing an off-white nightgown that was stained brown, and her hair was black and tangled. She was looking up into the sky, with her arms extended toward the sky, and she was rocking in a circular motion. I know it sounds ridiculous, but all 3 of us were totally uncomfortable. My friend's dad was rough around the edges, carpenter, no bullshit kind of guy. I remember really feeling scared when he asked US, "What the hell was that?" She didn't look like a homeless person or a drug addict, and we were so far from any town, we literally never had a single person in the 20 years I lived there wander into our area who didn't belong there. She legit looked like she came from another time period and was sitting in our ditch trying to summon a tornado. When we got home, my friend's dad walked us inside, which he didn't normally do because my parents didn't socialize with my friend's parents. He came in almost as if he wanted to kill time to not drive back by her again. He told my parents what we had seen, and we couldn't see her from our house, so we called the police just in case it was someone in need of psychiatric help. My friend and his dad left after a couple minutes, and the police came about 20 minutes later and said they didn't see anyone in the ditch and couldn't find anyone walking in the fields or roads in the surrounding area. My friend's dad called us once they got home and said that by the time they drove by the spot on their way home, she was gone. I truly cannot explain it. My friend's dad has since passed, but my friend says they still talked about it every now and then in the years following. Fourth story. I saw a Wendigo. This only happened a few days ago, so me and my sister were bored one day and decided to go ghost hunting, something me and a few family members do a lot. We decided to go to a few different places armed with a spirit box around our area. We had a few little responses to questions or just noises that made little to no sense. We decided to go to one of the oldest graveyards in the county that just so happened to be a few roads over from my mother's house. We get their setup turn on the spirit box and wait. Almost as soon as we turn on the spirit box, it starts going crazy. It starts with just repeating hello over and over again, then as clear as anything says my sister's name in my dad's voice. We look at each other in disbelief, then it does it again. At this point, I tune out. I don't know why, but I just go blank like my body, as frozen, but I can look around. I can faintly hear my sister asking questions and the spirtet box replying. As I was looking around, I see something moving out the corner of my eye. So me being the dumbass, I stupidly look right at it, and what I saw was a brown, almost skeletal creature. It was like its skin was tight to its bones. It was creeping through the trees surrounding the graveyard. I looked away before I could look at its face. I did not want to see it. In one motion, I stood up and turned toward the exit. My sister followed me without asking what happened, just switched off the SB, and we left. I waited until we were away from the graveyard to explain what I had just seen, and we both knew what it was. We got back to our mother's house and explained everything to her. Needless to say, she was freaked out. After a while, we had decided to do another spirit box session in the house with our mother. It was quiet for a few minutes until it said my older brother's name, who was not there at the time. Then it switched to his voice, which is very distinctive, and it kept repeating, "Mom, help me, Mom, help me." And it sounded distressed. At this point, we turned off the spirit box. I have had a lot. Like an unnatural amount of spirit encounters, but never anything like this. Fifth story. What do we see? This is a story from what a friend and I saw 7 years ago. It was the week of my birthday, November 2nd, 2017. And as I shared a birth date with one of my gamer friends, we decided to have a weekend birthday party that would take place from the 3rd to 5th. One of my friends had to go to work that Friday and work for a couple of hours before he could come back, but he didn't drive. I offered to drive him there and back, as he was a very good friend, and I didn't want him to miss the first night of TTRPGing. Also, since I had reached an age where I was not drinking as much as I did in my early 20s. He worked as a floor cleaner in a chain store in our home state of Michigan that was 20 miles away from my house. So I was fine with just waiting in my car with my book. Please keep these points in mind for anyone questioning how much detail I go into. I work in the criminal justice field and am trained to observe and retain details about notable events. I am still able to recall critical events from 12 years ago with great detail. Also, my friend was present and confirmed everything that I saw. He may not work in the criminal justice field, but he did go to college focused on it, and he is a great observer, often noticing things that all our friends miss. It was 2 in the morning when we drove to his job. Being the gamers and sci-fi/fantasy fans that we are, our conversations were filled with our geekiness the whole way up. Driving north along this Michigan highway, we didn't see anything other than some white-tailed deer movement, which in the rural area of Michigan is not out of the ordinary, and it seemed to be another fall night with a relatively open sky. My friend went into work while I read my book with nothing abnormal happening while I sat there. He came out a couple of hours later, and we set off back to my place. We had been driving and talking further about various geeky topics until we began driving up this hill. We just seemed to have an awkward silence between us in the middle of our conversation. I specifically remember thinking something was off as we reached the crest of the hill. At the crest of the hill is a house on the passenger side of the road with a mailbox and a guardrail, which leads from the base of the hill up to the driveway, because there's a crazy ditch on the other side of the rail. As we were about 50 yards from the driveway, I saw it standing there by the side of the road. I could see the brown legs, torso, and antlers. I specifically remember thinking that the deer looked huge, and in the back of my mind, thinking I should find out who owned property near there that would let me go hunting near the area. But as we reached the crest of the hill, I realized that this was not a white-tailed deer. This thing was standing on 2 legs with what would have been its front legs hanging at its sides, as a human would have their arms. The head was also wrong, as it didn't seem to have a snout, and its face was just covered by hide with its green glowing eyes facing toward us. Its antlers were sitting at the top of a human-shaped skull, which is not where they sit on a deer's head. This thing was massive, standing between 6.5 and 7 feet tall and very broad, which I'm gauging off of the scale against my car as I drove by it in comparison to my size. I drove a 2008 Chevy Impala, and I am 6 foot tall. My abdominals were aligned with the window when I was standing outside, and when we were right next to this thing, I saw its legs at knee level. I managed to keep driving onward without issue, and my friend and I continued in silence for nearly a mile when he finally turned to me and said, "Did you just—" he asked before I cut him off, saying. As he brought it up, I felt a knot forming in my stomach, and he continued, "You know, that could be—" I cut him off again and said, "I really don't want to talk about it." We stopped talking about it and continued for the next 10 miles in silence till we reached my house. We went to bed even though some of our friends were still up, but I did not sleep well the rest of the night. It should be said that I grew up in this 4-county area and have been traveling these roads at all hours of the day and night my entire life, especially the one that we had taken, which I traveled at least twice a week at roughly the same time frame. I have extensive experience with Michigan wildlife and have acted as the nighttime deer spotter for my family since I was old enough to see over the dash. I have hunted since I was 10 years old and have killed many deer, and, as is common in my area, I have been the victim of car deer accidents more than once in my life. If anyone thinks it was a person doing a prank, you can factor that percentage down to 0. It's near the end of bow hunting season at that time, and no one outside of the towns and cities would dare dress at a deer, much less by a road. I also discussed this with my friend before posting this, and our descriptions of events matched. We don't talk about this much and don't see each other often. I was used to staying up till dawn, so it wasn't me being tired. Why did it seem we had entered a sort of trance? I have seen blood spurting out of someone's open neck and not missed a beat as I applied pressure waiting for an ambulance. Why did it bother me so much? What was it? The Wendigo? A skinwalker? A not deer? Or something else? The questions still haunt me, along with the anxiety I feel every time I walk into the woods. I haven't seen it since, and I hope I never do. 6th story. Extremely tall entity in El Dorado County, California. My wife and I were driving down a very windy road at about 10 p.m. after dropping a friend off. It's a very wooded area, and properties are spread pretty far apart. This happened during the full moon in early February. It's very dark and secluded up there, but there was moonlight. While approaching the sharpest turn in the road, I began slowing down to approach the almost 180-degree turn in the road. There were no homes nearby here, just a gate entrance to someone's unkempt wooded property. I noticed while talking with my wife something moving across the road up ahead where the turn was to be made. My first thought was it was dust from a car that had made the turn ahead of us, but that made no sense because we were the only ones on the road up and again back down. What I saw was upwards of 20 feet, possibly even 30 feet tall, very skinny, and had kind of a bronze luminescence of its own. I thought it was dust in my headlights ahead, but it formed into a massively tall, slender, almost oval shape as it passed over the road. And as it got to the roadside and entered the tree line heading up the mountainside, I realized a very large, skinny leg stepped forth from the shape and stepped into the woods. It almost looked like golden smoke, but with a certain shape and density to it. Needless to say, as soon as I realized I was witnessing something very unnatural, I started to say, "Did you see that?" And my wife cut me off to say, "You saw it too?" All of my hairs stood up, and I could feel the charge in the air of intense energy, even with the windows up and the heater on. I became very afraid and kept driving down the mountain because I knew we had both just witnessed something we probably should have not. I pulled off of the road about a half a mile away to discuss specifically what we had just seen. Our descriptions matched to a T. I had had a very negative paranormal experience as a teenager, so when she enthusiastically demanded we go back, I was very hesitant. But finally, curiosity got the best of me, and we returned to the place we saw this thing. I'm still not sure if what I saw was cryptid or alien, or some type of spirit, but I can say it was inhuman, and its sheer size made it very frightening. I parked in the road with my headlights, shining up the hillside in the direction it was traveling, but nothing was there. We stood in the dark for about 15 minutes with the truck off, snapping photos and videos, but captured nothing unusual. I'm very interested to hear what anyone's theory on what this could have possibly been. Seventh story. Wendigo sighting near my home. It was the early 2010s, and my dad and I were walking down from my grandma's house, which was right up a hill from my house. There's an oval-shaped lot, which has a row of trees along one side. As we were walking down to my house, my dad and I noticed a large buck with massive antlers in between two trees. About 2 seconds of staring at the buck, it stood on its hind legs and walked a short distance up the hill before vanishing into the darkness of the woods which lined the entirety of my town. I've since moved to a house that has the woods as a backyard, and sometimes I can hear deer running through the deer trails, wondering if one of them was the Wendigo I saw as a wee lass. Eighth story. The Witch of Whispering Woods. I'm an 80-year-old woman with a body that is winding down, but a mind that remains sharp as a tack. My memory is brilliant, perhaps a little too brilliant, as I am prone to remembering things I would rather forget, such as the day I encountered the Witch of Whispering Woods. This isn't a story I've told many people, and for the longest time, I believed I would take it to my grave. But the burden has grown too heavy for my withered shoulders to bear, and all I want is to live out my final years in peace. God knows I need it. I grew up in a small Massachusetts town I will not name, raised in a middle-class family with 5 children. I was the baby, and my parents and siblings spoiled me. We lived in a small brick house on the edge of town, backed by acres of thick forest. That forest was known as Whispering Woods, and have been the topic of childhood nightmares for generations. Even if you don't live in Massachusetts, or America, for that matter, you have likely heard about the Salem witch trials. Well, our town wasn't too far from Salem, and we had a dark history of our own. According to local lore, a witch had been hanged in Whispering Woods, and her wrathful spirit still lingered about. As a little girl, those stories terrified me to no end, and I made sure to stay out of Whispering Woods. I imagined all manner of grotesque creatures hiding in the shadows, and I pictured the witch herself as a gnarled old hag with glowing red eyes and teeth like butcher knives. I remember this one time I was playing ball with my sister Janet and threw it too far. It disappeared into the tree line. Janet went to retrieve it, and watching the brush swallow her up sent me into hysterics. I was convinced the witch would come and take my big sister away, never to be seen again. Fortunately, as I matured, my fears began to subside. By the fall of 1951, when I was 14 years old, I no longer believed in the Witch of Whispering Woods. The stories I had heard seemed silly and nonsensical, and besides, I was too busy with school and friends to let my imagination run wild. Still, Whispering Woods made me uneasy, and I continued to avoid the place. That is, until Marjorie Hill dared my best friend Patricia and I to spend the night there. Marjorie Hill was a loud, boisterous tomboy with long legs and a shock of curly red hair. She had a deep voice with a booming laugh and never seemed to shut up. Patricia and I found her obnoxious, and Marjorie knew this, so she went out of her way to annoy us both. Bet you two couldn't last a minute in Whispering Woods, she taunted us in the schoolyard one morning. You'd both run out crying. Go away, Marjorie, I snapped. Now, don't be like that. She thumped my back, nearly knocking me right over. It's not my fault you're such a baby. You're just a bully. I dare you. Marjorie smirked. I dare both of you to spend the night in Whispering Woods. My mouth dried up. The dam within me broke, and all my memories of childhood terror came flowing out. I began to shake, and Patricia put her arm around me. See, you are scared. Shut up. I yelled at her. I'll do it. As much as the thought horrified me, I couldn't give Marjorie the satisfaction of seeing me so afraid. Patricia looked at me like I had gone mad, but all I could focus on was Marjorie's freckled face as it went from smug to shocked. "Oh, really?" she stammered. "You'll do it?" "Yes, but on one condition. My brother comes with us." Gerald was a year older than me, tall and built like an army tank. Despite his imposing appearance, he was a gentle giant, but not afraid to get his hands dirty if need be. I'd feel much safer with him around. "Fine, bring Gerald," said Marjorie. She whirled around and started to walk away, then paused and looked back over her shoulder at Patricia and I. "Oh, and I'm coming too. I have to make sure you guys don't try anything funny." "Lorraine," Patricia whispered once Marjorie was out of sight. "Are you sure about this?" "No," I admitted. "But maybe if we prove that we aren't babies, she'll leave us alone." I'm aware of the faults in my own logic, but remember, I was young and prideful, and my anger had clouded my judgment. Now, looking back, I realized that taking Marjorie's dare was the biggest mistake of my life. I wish more than anything that I could go back in time and change what happened, set events rolling in a different direction. By telling you my story, I'm also confessing my wrongdoings, and although I don't expect forgiveness, I hope you can understand why I did what I did. The plan was to set up camp in Whispering Woods and spend the whole night there, leaving only after the sun came up. When I told my parents about the plan, they were skeptical given my past fear of the woods. I didn't tell them about the dare. "Patricia and I thought it might be fun," I lied. "Besides, we'll have Gerald with us." It took some convincing, but eventually my parents agreed, as long as we didn't go too deep into the woods. I called Patricia, and she told me her parents had also agreed to the trip. Everything was set, and at 5:30 the following evening, Gerald and I left our house with our tent, food, water, sleeping bags, and whatever else we might need. We met up at the head of the main trail with Marjorie and Patricia. It was Marjorie, of course, who took the lead. "We'll camp out in the clearing," she announced. The tree they hanged the witch from used to stand there, but after she died, the bark turned black and the surrounding grass turned dry and yellow. So the townspeople cut it down, believing it to be cursed. "You just made that up," I accused. "No, I didn't. It's true." We walked the trail in relative silence. I marveled at how normal Whispering Woods appeared, with its towering trees and leafy green bushes. Birds chirped up in the branches and squirrels scurried around in the brush. It didn't look anything like a haunted forest should. That said, there was still something sinister in the air, clinging to us like thick black smoke. Patricia clung to my arm, her body stiff as a board, fear crackling beneath her skin like electricity. Gerald kept his hands shoved into his pockets, his face pale and tight-lipped. Only Marjorie remained unaffected, skipping along and humming to herself. The sky had turned hazy purple with twilight by the time we arrived at the clearing. We set up camp, and I helped Gerald build a fire. I found myself jumping at every snapping twig, every bird call. My terror of this place was creeping back in. Marjorie noticed and began to laugh. "Poor Lorraine," she sneered. "I knew you wouldn't last." "Leave her alone," said Gerald. "Look," Marjorie pointed. "There's the stump of the old tree." The four of us walked over to investigate. The stump had dozens of rings, indicating it was very old. Marjorie groaned and muttered, "It looks normal." Asterisk. "See? You did make that story up." "Did not." Okay. Gerald waved a hand between us. "Let's just go back to camp." We cooked dinner and sat around the fire for a while, talking about everything and nothing. By that point, the sky was pitch black, veiled in clouds, with no moon or stars in sight. Whispering Woods had gone silent around us. There wasn't so much as a single cricket chirping. Patricia bumped her knee against mine and whispered, "I have to go to the bathroom." "So go." "No." Patricia shook her head. I don't want to go alone. Okay, I'll come with you. We excused ourselves and walked across the clearing to a small clump of bushes. I turned away to give my friend privacy, while keeping an eye on the flickering fire. Gerald and Marjorie were huddled close together, in a way that seemed a little too intimate. The thought of Marjorie Hill dating my brother made me sick to my stomach. Lorraine, Patricia whispered. Lorraine, come over here. I looked. She was standing on the opposite side of the bushes, and although I could only make out shadows and shapes, I sensed that she was genuinely spooked. What's wrong? I asked, my voice cracking midway through. Come here. I went to stand next to her, clicking on my flashlight and casting it across the forest floor. I was not prepared for what I found. The biggest buck I had ever seen sprawled at our feet. Its neck was bent at a grotesque angle. Its swollen purple tongue bulged out, and pink, slimy intestines spilled out of the hideous gash along its belly. I dry heaved, my hands clutching my stomach. Patricia began to cry. She loved animals and couldn't stand seeing them hurt. I put my arm around her and guided her back to camp. What's wrong? Gerald demanded, jumping to his feet. Dead deer, I mouthed over Patricia's curly strawberry blonde head. My brother took my flashlight from me and went to investigate himself. Patricia and I sat down next to Marjorie, who was braiding blades of grass together. A minute later, Gerald came back, looking pale. What on earth could have done that? He gasped. A wolf? Or maybe it was a bear. I don't know. Maybe we should leave, said Marjorie. This was your idea, I reminded her, although I wouldn't mind leaving these woods. Not at all. The carcass did look fresh, said Gerald. It might not be safe, Dash. He was cut off by a shrill, blood-curdling scream from the direction of the dead buck. It was so loud it made the leaves on the trees shake. I clamped my hands over my ears and fell back, while Patricia gripped my arm like a vice and wailed. Gerald shouted for us to stay calm. Marjorie jumped up and ran like every demon in hell was chasing her. Hey, I screamed. Get back here. You coward. What the hell is she doing? Gerald hollered. Patricia shrieked and pointed. Gerald and I followed her gaze to two tiny pinpricks of light floating between two trees. The realization that they were eyes hit me like a freight train, and my legs gave out. I collapsed my knees, shaking, and Gerald put his hand on my back. Get up. Lorraine, come on. Get up. Behind the eyes came an animalistic hiss. There was a rustling in the bushes, soft footsteps that sounded like gunfire in the dark. The thing moved closer, those eerie, glowing eyes on us. Slowly, a form began to emerge. In the orange glow of the fire, I could make out a human shape, but not much beyond that. When Gerald reached for his flashlight, I screamed, "No!" at him, but it was too late. My brother cast the light directly onto the thing before bellowing, "Run!" Him, Patricia, and I took off. The horrible abomination gave chase, snarling and hissing like a cat. I had seen it. In the split second between Gerald shining his flashlight and yelling at Patricia and I to run, I had seen the Witch of Whispering Woods. How I managed to process so much detail in such a short time span is a mystery to me. But whatever the case, the image of that creature has been seared into my mind like those brands put on cattle. The witch was ghastly pale, with eyes that glowed like twin stars, and a gaping maw filled with jagged, yellowed teeth. Wisps of flyaway hair clung precariously to her scalp. Her neck was abnormally long. Her back was so hunched that she moved like a gorilla, bony-knuckled hands scraping the forest floor. She howled, hissed, shrieked, and cackled as she lumbered after us. We kept on running, screaming for help even though we knew no one would hear us. At one point, I lost my shoes. Sharp rocks, twigs, and brambles cut my feet, but my terror drowned out the pain. My lungs were on fire. My throat was raw from screaming. I thought I knew true fear. How wrong I was. A root caught my foot and sent me sprawling face first. My nose broke, spilling hot, coppery blood down my chin. Gerald and Patricia, who hadn't noticed, disappeared around a bend in the trail. Immediately, I felt the witch's hot, rancid breath on the back of my neck. She twisted her gnarled fingers into my hair and wrenched my head back. I screamed as loud as I could, but to no avail. The witch brought her dry, blackened lips to my ear and hissed in my ear. I'm not ashamed to admit my bladder let go. The sharp scent of urine mixed with the foul aroma of the witch's breath, and I nearly passed out. Just as the witch clamped her vicious teeth around my neck, Gerald came tearing back down the trail, his fists swinging, his face red and twisted into an ugly mask of pure rage. With one powerful thrust of his leg, he kicked the witch in the head, hard enough that her neck snapped back with an ear-splitting crack. The witch shrieked and dug her talons into my back, piercing my skin. Gerald kicked her again, and finally, the horrible creature rolled off of me. "Come on," Gerald yelled. I staggered to my feet, and so did the witch. Her neck was snapped in two, just like the buck's, but she seemed unfazed, her eyes blazing, her lips curled back in a furious snarl. "Go!" Gerald bellowed. I took off again, sobbing hysterically, knowing my brother probably wouldn't come back. I caught up with Patricia, who had collapsed, crying and vomiting up her dinner. We heard thundering footsteps and looked up to see a mob of men from the town approaching. One of them scooped me up and cradled me close. "Father." "It's okay, little one," he cooed, his normally gruff voice gentle and serene. "It's okay." I tried to tell him that Gerald was still in the woods with that thing, but I could only babble incoherently, unable to string together a coherent sentence. Thankfully, Father seemed to understand. He handed me to my mother and followed the other men into Whispering Woods, each carrying a weapon, charging like soldiers in a battle. Most of the town, it seemed, had gathered at the edge of the woods. I saw Marjorie sobbing in her mother's arms and wanted to scream at her for leaving us behind, but I couldn't. I knew she was the one who had alerted the townspeople to our situation, and for that, I had to be grateful. From the woods came an ungodly cacophony of screams and gunshots. Smoke rose from the treetops, and I swore I could smell blood. 5 minutes later, Father returned, clutching shredded mass of blood, flesh, and fabric that had once been my brother. That was when I passed out. Gerald was buried in the town's cemetery. He and 4 others died in the woods that night. The men had shot at the witch until she retreated, growling and dripping blood. Our campsite was discovered the next day, all our belongings torn to shreds. Fragments of the witch's fingernails were found embedded in my back. My broken nose never healed quite right, and years later, when plastic surgery became an option, I chose not to have it corrected. I wanted to remember what I'd been through, what had happened that night. Mother was catatonic for months after Gerald's death. Marjorie's family left town a year later, leaving the carnage behind. Patricia and I remained best friends, our bond deepened by our horrific ordeal. Years passed. I married and moved to Boston, raising a family of my own. I would often visit my childhood home, of which I still had countless good memories. But I could never escape the shock of what I'd seen, the guilt of what I'd done. To this day, I blame myself for my brother's death. Whispering Woods still stands to this day, as if nothing ever happened. I know the witch is still there. I wonder if she remembers us. I wonder if she knows Patricia and I are still alive. The wounds on my back left ugly purple scars. On the anniversary of that night, they tingle and burn. Every now and then, I have nightmares of that horrible face leering at me from the shadows. I can still hear the sounds that creature made as it chased us. I can still feel and smell her breath. So there you have it. That's the story of my night in Whispering Woods. The story of how my brother died to protect me. The story of the scars on my back. I don't blame Marjorie for what happened. She didn't truly believe there was a witch in Whispering Woods, and she couldn't have known what would happen. I haven't seen her since she moved away. I wonder where she is now, if she's even still alive. Does she blame herself too? This past week, Patricia passed away from old age. I returned to town for her funeral, and after the mourners had left, went to visit Gerald's grave. "Take care of Patricia once she gets to heaven," I whispered, "just like you took care of me." As I turned and walked away, I swear I felt a strong hand on my back, pushing me forward, but it was probably just the wind. Ninth story, the Bell Witch Cave. This happened to me while I was in college. I went to college in Kentucky, only about an hour away from Adams, Tennessee, where the Bell Witch Cave is located. Adams is a tiny one-stoplight town that you might miss if you blink. If you don't know what the Bell Witch Cave is, either read the Wikipedia article on it or watch the movie An American Haunting. I had a boss in the student library where I worked that told me you couldn't pay him enough money to go back there, and the ghost was able to whisper something to his girlfriend that only she knew. He also warned me not to challenge the ghost. Anyway, me and two friends decided to jump into my old Dodge Dynasty and head down there on Halloween night for a tour. We got there just in time for the last tour of the night at midnight. While on the tour, we went past some old Indian remains and a little deeper into the cave where some water was running. The farthest they'll usually take you is a formation called Eagle Rock. I stuck my head past the rock, and I could have sworn some greenish light flashed from the back of the cave towards me. It made me shake my head a couple of times. We got ready to leave the cave, and of course, as a half joke, I called out, "Kate, show yourself." Immediately, I heard something whisper, but I couldn't make out the words. I dismissed it as hearing other tour goers talking in the distance. My friends and I started back towards my car. It was about 50 degrees out, so a rather cool fall night. As we came up the hill, we suddenly hit a spot of extremely warm air rising from the ground, and I'd estimate 75 degrees or more. It smelled strange too, like flint. We explained it away as likely some hot water from the cave running close to the surface there, but it still seemed odd. As we got closer to the grass parking lot, we heard the family's dog barking incessantly at something. We finally saw my car, and then we saw the dog bolt from the car with its tail between its legs. I joked that it was barking at the ghost haunting my car. We got in the car and started it up and headed back towards the highway. Strange things started to happen. The heat was on full blast, but the interior of the car would not warm up. Both my friends and I commented it felt like something was trying to make us cry or our eyes water up. The windows all fogged up, and as we passed an exit and some lights, we noticed a backwards K and a handprint embossed in the fog on the outside of the window. By the next exit, a P had formed on the windows outside. During the tour, we had been told the ghost had been known as Kate or Pele. Things didn't really quiet down until we got to the Kentucky border, and the heat finally started working and the fog disappeared from the windows. Sometimes even now, I feel the pull of the ghost of the Bell Witch Cave, asking me to return. I don't know what would happen if I did. I'm getting chills just writing this. 10th story, the well in the woods. When I was a kid, Dad told me to never go into the woods near our house. Of course, I always asked why, but Dad didn't seem to want to talk about it. And he always stopped every one of my siblings from going in there too. I'm the oldest of 7 siblings, from oldest to youngest. There's me, Diego, and then there's Silvana, Sebastian, Carlos, Inez, Romina, and Alejandro. And all of us are forbidden from going in the woods. All of them always protest, especially Inez. She's really been getting into a bunch of witchcraft stuff recently and wants to go in the woods to do who knows what. But I found out firsthand when I was 16 why Dad didn't want us in the woods. People went into the woods all the time and came out okay. I used to live in Blackthorn, Ohio, and the woods in my childhood house are near the border of town. I was walking by the woods when, more curious than ever, I decided to go in and see what Dad was making such a huge fuss about. I walked around, going deeper in, and found nothing. I laughed at Dad and was about to head straight back out when I found an old well in a clearing. I don't know what compelled me to look into it, but I did, and all I saw on the bottom was a bunch of dirty, slimy water and other gunk. I leaned a little too far over, though, and I fell in. I screamed all the way down before landing with a sick splash. Luckily, I survived the fall, landing on my butt. I sat at the bottom of the well and screamed when something I couldn't explain, at least not then, happened. The slime and gunk began to move, eventually shaping itself into an almost humanoid shape. It towered over me. I tried to scream again, but nothing came out. There was a small plastic purple figurine of a superhero in the well with us. The slime creature reached out and grabbed it, passing it to me. I held it, still scared and unsure of what this creature wanted to do to me. But nothing happened for a while. Eventually, I started absent-mindedly playing with the toy, and that's when the creature took it from me, whooshing it around its head, pretending the toy was flying. I gulped. I was starting to suspect the impossible, that this creature just wanted to play with me. And so, I indulged the slimy monster. For about a week, we mainly played with the superhero figurine and sometimes assorted clapping games. We tried playing tag once, but there wasn't any room in the well. And eventually, the police found me in the well and got me out. I told them I had fallen in the well and been unable to get out until they rescued me. For whatever reason, I didn't tell them about the creature. Mom and Dad were mad at me for ages, but especially Dad. And I bring it up now because of my recent re-encounter with the creature. I came back home for a visit recently, and to visit some of my other siblings. Carlos, Inez, Romina, and Alejandro still live at my childhood home. And especially Alejandro will live there for a while. He's just a baby, after all. And for a third reason, to revisit the woods, to see that creature again. And when nobody was looking, I walked off into the woods and found the well again. I looked into it, looking for the creature, and this time, the slime and muck rose out of the well to see me, pulling me forward in a hug. It still had the superhero figurine. It was really tight, though. I tried to struggle out of its grasp and failed. I worried it was going to just kidnap me in the well forever. I regretted every decision that had led to this point. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me, turning around to see Dad. I started panicking, but he spoke first. Theo? I was confused. Theo? The creature had a name? And how did Dad know it? Just then, Dad pulled a matching superhero figurine out of his pocket and showed it to the creature. The creature took it and started making the two superheroes fly together. And then Dad explained everything to me. When he was 4, he and his best friend Theo had gone to play in the woods with their favorite superhero toys, pretending they were flying. But Theo hadn't seen the well, and he had fallen down and broken his neck. And now, apparently, he had been resurrected as this slimy creature and was still mentally 4. These days, we've come to an arrangement with him. Either me or Dad comes and plays with him for a while, at least twice every week. And of course, not actually in the well, but still in the woods. It's a bit strange babysitting a giant slime monster with the brain of an average 4-year-old. But it's growing on me. No pun intended. 8th story. The time I saw a Wendigo. First things first, this happened to me when I was around 10. I've lived in Idaho all my life and spent a lot of time outside or in the wilderness as a kid. My grandparents would take me camping, and my older brother and I would always hike up whatever trails we could find to get a view of the sunset. On one of these occasions, something terrifying happened. We were up at a campsite I only know as Warm River, the river there never freezes over, and my brother and I were on a regular evening hike. There was an old tunnel bored through the mountain at one part of the trail, probably an old train tunnel, and we were walking through it when I heard something I'll never forget. After walking through probably two-thirds of the way through the tunnel, I heard a terrible screech at the end we entered through. The screech wasn't like anything I've heard before. I've heard the screams of animals on dark and windy nights. I even think I've heard Bigfoot calls a few times, but never the metallic, grinding screech I heard that day. The point is, whatever the sound was, it did not sound natural in any capacity. I probably jumped 5 feet in the air when I heard it, and my brother shouted a few choice curses before shooing me quickly to the exit of the tunnel. At this point, my brother decided we should just continue walking and head back after whatever made the noise hopefully cleared out. We didn't have any firearms on us, so I was pretty upset. My brother reassured me we would be fine, and we made the walk back without incident. However, I didn't get any sleep that night. Whether it was the thing that screeched at us or just my imagination, I heard things moving around the campsite the whole night, as well as whispers echoing through the darkness outside the trailer. I woke my brother up a few times to check out what it was, but he refused each time, telling me that it was probably just other campers staying up late and enjoying themselves. The rest of the trip was pretty normal. We packed up the following day, and my life continued as normal. I was disconcerted, but chalked what happened up as a harmless event that I must have been exaggerating in retrospect. A few weeks later, I went up to Pine Basin, an old ski lodge my family rented each year for family reunions. Here I would mess around with my cousins, our favorite activities being night games. We would play hide and seek, a game called Ghosts in the Graveyard, and other games like that. On one instance, I was chosen to be the seeker for a hide and seek game. Because I was one of the younger cousin, I got a flashlight as an advantage. Normally, all the younger cousins hid close to the lodge, and the older cousins hid in the nearby trees or at the base of the nearby mountain. As I was searching near the bottom of the mountain, I heard a familiar whistle up the mountain a bit. We would always whistle as a hint at our locations. It sounded like someone was hiding way up near a tree known as the underwear tree. You can guess why. So I began trekking up toward the whistle. As I climbed closer, I got an uneasy feeling in my stomach. I continued on wearily and convinced myself that I would be fine. I hated walking in the night alone, but figured whoever I find would walk me back to the lodge. As I neared the tree, I noticed that it was deathly silent. This alerted me that something was very wrong, because you could always hear the adults having fun back at the lodge. I was anxious to hurry back, so I called out, "I found you, Scott." I thought the whistle was my older cousin's. "Come back down with me." I got no reply, but I wasn't planning on waiting. As I began walking back down the path, I heard a voice call, "You almost had me," so I ran back up to investigate. I flashed my light in the branches of the tree and saw a monstrosity that was not my cousin. It looked like a poorly drawn stick figure made into a human with its emaciated figure and lifeless eyes. I remember its face looked like the skin on its head was being pulled from behind. It had torn and stretched features. As soon as I saw the creature, I screamed, dropped the flashlight, and ran back to the lodge. The entire time I ran, I was overcome by an overpowering smell, and I could hear the thing running after me. As I approached the camp, I saw a few people, my cousins, at the bottom of the mountain waiting for me. I was crying and shaking, and they took me inside. I told my dad what happened, but my cousins all said they didn't see anything following me. The adults kept us inside for the night, and I kept hearing sounds drifting in from the mountains. I never played night games after that happened, and was always terrified that my cousins wouldn't listen to my warnings. Ever since that night, I have always felt uneasy up in those mountains. I used to be really religious and figured it was a demon of some kind trying to kill me or something like that. But those mountains have never felt the same after that incident. A few years ago, the game, Until Dawn, became really popular, and I watched a walkthrough of it on YouTube. When the Wendigo first appeared in game, I got chills down my spine. It was exactly what I saw, and I did a ton of research on them. I figure someone must have gotten snowed in at that old lodge and resorted to cannibalism. But that doesn't explain what happened at Warm River. I still hear that screech from time to time. It never occurred to me until watching Until Dawn that they might be from the same thing. And it scares the hell out of me every time. I heard it earlier tonight, and that's why I decided to finally write my story down. Wish me luck. Thanks a lot for watching this video till the end. Drop your suggestions in the comment section.